Look at your life right now. If you lost your job tomorrow, how long could you last before begging? A week? A month? Maybe a little longer if you've saved. But for most, savings vanish fast. One medical bill, one emergency, and the so-called safety net is gone. That's the truth most people hide from, because when money disappears, survival disappears with it. And when survival goes, respect follows. Suddenly you're explaining yourself, apologizing, asking permission. You don't just lose comfort, you lose your dignity. You can shout the truth, but no one listens. You can work harder than everyone, but you're still replaceable. Poverty doesn't just strip your choices, it erases your presence. Now flip the coin. With money, everything bends around you. You don't wait in lines, you skip them. You don't ask for permission, you decide who gets access. Even silence becomes power, because people lean in when the wealthy speak and bow when they don't. This is why they've lied to you since the beginning. Parents who told you just be grateful. Teachers who said money isn't everything. Influencers who preach minimalism while cashing in on sponsorships. Politicians who say we're all equal while they collect donations. Even friends and family shame you if you dream too big, because your ambition makes their excuses look small. They need you to believe money is greed, money is evil, money doesn't matter, because once you accept that lie, you stay obedient, easy to control. But look at who actually builds wealth. Banks that make money lending out your savings. Corporations that turn every dollar into 10. Governments that print debt while you scramble to pay bills. The wealthy don't work for money, they make money work for them, and history proves it's always been this way. Caesar bought legions with gold. Alexander's empire marched on treasuries, not speeches. Even prophets needed patrons to spread their words. Power has always knelt to money, and it always will. In the next hour, I'll show you why money must be acquired at all costs, why savings alone are never enough, why poverty is nothing but chains disguised as virtue, why even justice and morality bend to the ones who can pay the price. And once you see the truth, you'll never look at life the same way again. The only question is, will you keep living like everyone else, or will you do whatever it takes to step into power? They will never tell you this openly, but the possession of money is the possession of freedom itself, and to lack it is to accept chains disguised as civility. In every city, in every family, in every gathering where men measure one another, there is one unspoken truth that decides whose words matter and whose do not. Wealth dictates the gravity of a voice. Without it, brilliance becomes noise. Wisdom becomes a whisper drowned in the clamor of those who can purchase attention. With it, even mediocrity is exalted as genius, because men instinctively bow to those who hold the keys to their own survival. Observe carefully, those who denounce money most loudly are the ones already enslaved by its absence, speaking bitterness to veil their impotence. A man who cannot command resources is a man forced into the theater of begging, however politely it is staged. To acquire money, then, is not greed, it is the foundation of sovereignty, the only shield against dependence, humiliation, and silence. The truth is harsh. Money is not merely the medium of exchange, it is the weapon that ensures respect before a word is spoken. It stands as a fortress in negotiations, a silent ally that compels others to bend their pride. A man with wealth never truly enters a room alone. His gold walks before him, clearing the way, softening resistance, and muting insult. Those who scoff at wealth's necessity live in illusions, believing virtue or intelligence alone will suffice in a world that measures survival by accounts and possessions. They forget that even virtue requires bread, even genius requires patronage. Even the voice of prophets is carried farther when financed by those who understand power. Without money, principles wither into poverty's rhetoric, and without money, even the noblest heart is forced to serve ignoble masters. Consider how governments, armies, and even faiths are bound to it. Crowns are not defended by prayers alone, but by soldiers whose loyalty is purchased in coin. Laws are enforced not by morality, but by courts and prisons sustained by budgets. Temples rise to the heavens not by inspiration, but by donations and tithes gathered from the pockets of the devoted. Every structure of power, whether secular or sacred, leans upon money as its hidden foundation. The man who does not secure his own wealth surrenders by default to the designs of others, becoming a pawn in their strategies. He wakes each day reacting to commands, never issuing them, because he has no capital to enforce his will. Poverty is not only the absence of money, it is the absence of leverage, and leverage is the essence of power. The weak console themselves by calling wealth corrupt, but corruption belongs not to money but to the hands that wield it. A blade in the hand of a coward is wasted steel. In the hand of a commander, it becomes destiny. So too with wealth. In the hand of a fool, it vanishes into indulgence, but in the hand of a strategist, it builds empires. The wise man does not reject money. He studies how it moves, how it seduces, how it reshapes the loyalties of men. He acquires it not for the sake of pleasure, but for the authority it grants, the independence it preserves, and the dominion it makes possible. To live without this weapon is to live unarmed in a world where every man is hunting for advantage. Those who embrace poverty as a virtue misunderstand human nature, for even the charitable cannot give without first possessing, and even the spiritual cannot ascend without first being fed. Look upon history's stage and note that those remembered as great did not merely wield swords or ideas, they wielded wealth. Alexander did not march without treasuries. Caesar did not conquer without funding his legions. Merchants and bankers determined the fate of republics as surely as generals. The flow of coin has often dictated where wars were won before the first arrow was released. Even revolutionaries who scorned the rich depended on secret patrons who bankrolled their cause. To pretend otherwise is to blind oneself to the law that governs all affairs. Money is the bloodstream of power, and to command it is to command the body of society itself. A man without wealth is forever negotiating from weakness, forever dependent on the generosity or neglect of others. He may call himself free, but he is tethered by invisible ropes, debts, rents, wages, obligations that keep him crawling though he dreams of flight. To break these ropes requires accumulation, the disciplined pursuit of money not as an end but as a foundation for every higher aim. Love, art, philosophy, faith, all demand time and security, and both are purchased. The poet who scorns wealth may write beautifully, but he still depends on someone else's coin to eat. The man who claims disdain for riches while borrowing from friends is not noble but parasitic. Better the ruthless honesty of one who declares, "I will acquire wealth at all costs," than the sanctimonious hypocrisy of one who masks envy with disdain. Therefore, the pursuit of money cannot be timid, nor half-hearted, nor conducted as if it were shameful. It must be relentless, disciplined, and shielded from distraction. At all costs means without apology. For every cost paid now prevents a greater cost later, the cost of subjugation, of humiliation, of a life dictated by others. Men who lack money will tell you wealth is not everything, and they are correct, but only because to them it is nothing, and they have never tasted what it is to command destiny with a single decision that others must obey. Wealth is not everything, but without it, everything else becomes fragile, conditional, and at risk of being stripped away. The man who acquires money acquires security, and the man who acquires security acquires the freedom to shape his own existence. And yet observe how easily men betray their own ambitions by dismissing wealth as secondary, convincing themselves that talent, loyalty, or moral purity will carry them through. Such illusions are convenient for rulers, for they pacify the masses into servitude, ensuring that the poor remain docile while the rich grow more entrenched. The truth is that without money, even the most loyal ally can be discarded when he is no longer useful, for loyalty cannot be eaten, and morality does not pay a soldier's wage. Men are respected not merely for their virtues, but for their capacity to enforce them, and enforcement requires resources. A virtuous pauper is a curiosity at best, a forgotten shadow at worst. But a wealthy man, even if immoral, bends the course of events, because men obey the hand that feeds them before they heed the voice that lectures them. Money is not only an instrument of survival, it is the only language universally understood by enemies and allies alike. Promises may be doubted, threats may be resisted, but gold rarely lies. When a man lays coin upon the table, uncertainty evaporates, and decisions are made swiftly. Power without money is fragile, dependent on goodwill or illusion. But power with money is concrete, for it buys silence, loyalty, and action in equal measure. A ruler with an empty treasury is no ruler at all, and a man who boasts of influence without wealth is a pretender whose empire dissolves at the first demand for proof. If you would walk through life unchallenged, let your purse speak louder than your tongue, for men bow not to arguments but to abundance. This is why those who disdain money often find themselves cornered by those who do not. The ascetic may preach detachment, but he still depends on the generosity of patrons to sustain his austerity. The philosopher may speak of virtue, but his words travel farther when printed with the funds of a wealthy backer. The rebel may curse the tyrant, but his revolution will starve without benefactors willing to invest in chaos. Everywhere one looks, the necessity of money exposes itself like a shadow that cannot be escaped. To deny this is to deny the laws that govern men, and to live without money is to live at the mercy of those who possess it. Understand this: the acquisition of money is not an act of greed, but an act of defense. Without it, a man is naked before a world that seeks constantly to exploit him. Employers underpay because the worker has no reserve. Lenders overcharge because the borrower has no alternatives. Friends grow impatient with the one who cannot contribute, and family loses respect for the one who cannot provide. Poverty strips a man not only of comfort but of dignity, and once dignity is lost, everything else follows. Wealth, therefore, is not only the shield against hunger and homelessness, it is the armor that preserves honor. It is also the great magnifier of choice. The poor man must accept what is offered. The wealthy man chooses what he desires. The poor man must endure the insult, for he cannot afford retaliation. The wealthy man may answer or ignore, for insult carries no cost to him. The poor man fears sickness, disaster, and betrayal, because each would ruin him. The wealthy man prepares for all three and remains unshaken. In this difference lies the true meaning of freedom, not the absence of chains, but the power to move without fear of them. Money grants this power, and to neglect its pursuit is to forfeit liberty itself. Therefore, when one says at all costs, it is not mere rhetoric. It is a commandment of survival, a recognition that every sacrifice made for wealth is a sacrifice made for autonomy. To toil, to delay pleasure, to endure the scorn of those who mock ambition, all of these are prices worth paying, for their reward is command over one's own life. He who hesitates, who compromises, who accepts the comfort of small wages and the illusion of stability, discovers too late that he has bartered away his future for crumbs. Better the hard road toward riches than the easy road toward dependence, for only one ends in sovereignty. Yet one must see clearly that money is not pursued merely for its accumulation, but for the transformations it compels in the world around the possessor. With it, doors open that remain closed to the poor, alliances form that would otherwise be impossible, and enemies who once sneered are forced into civility. Wealth changes not only how a man moves, but how others move around him. His silence carries weight, his presence commands anticipation, and even his absence is felt like a pressure in the air. This is the unspoken authority money creates, a magnetism that bends social reality without needing to announce itself. Men mistake this for charisma, for intelligence, for destiny, but strip away the gold and watch how quickly their reverence evaporates. This is why rulers hoard treasuries as zealously as generals sharpen their blades. For money fuels more than survival. It fuels expansion, conquest, and legacy. No city is built on virtue alone. No dynasty is preserved by goodwill. It is silver that lays the stones, gold that pays the architects, and wealth that secures the heirs. Even glory itself must be financed, for statues require sculptors, songs require patrons, and victories require armies fed and clothed. Without money, ambition collapses into dreams deferred, noble but impotent, remembered by none. With money, ambition becomes enduring architecture, solid enough to outlast the men who conceived it. Thus, the acquisition of wealth is not only a matter of self-preservation, but of imprinting one's will upon history. Still, many recoil at this truth. Preferring the comfort of illusions, they cling to the belief that love, loyalty, or pure brilliance will sustain them, forgetting that all three wither in the absence of resources. Love demands a roof under which it can endure. Loyalty demands reward, lest it turn into resentment, and brilliance demands time, which is purchased by the freedom wealth provides. Men who ignore this law soon discover their companions desert them, their passions consume them, and their brilliance is squandered in the exhaustion of daily struggle. Poverty makes beggars of lovers, cynics of friends, and failures of geniuses. Only money prevents this decay, for it feeds every other virtue, allowing them to grow instead of perish. One should not think, however, that money alone guarantees greatness. It must be pursued with discipline, wielded with strategy, and preserved with caution, for as swiftly as it grants power, it can summon ruin to the careless. Many have risen through wealth only to fall by their extravagance, mistaking possession for permanence. Wealth is not a companion to be trusted blindly, but a beast to be mastered, a servant that turns into a master if left unchecked. To acquire money at all costs, then, is not to drown in indulgence, but to sharpen it into a tool, an instrument of freedom, command, and influence. A fool gains riches and becomes their prisoner. A wise man gains riches and turns them into fortresses. See how even those who claim to despise wealth cannot resist its gravity. The moralist rails against corruption while coveting donations for his cause. The artist scorns commerce while begging for patrons. The ascetic denounces gold but thrives on the offerings of others. Every man is touched by money's hand, whether he admits it or not. It is better to grasp this openly and master it than to live in denial and fall prey to those who already have. The pursuit of wealth, then, is not shameful but honest. It is to acknowledge the battlefield as it is, not as one wishes it to be. And in that battlefield, the unarmed man is already defeated. Thus the demand remains clear. To acquire money at all costs is not greed but survival, not indulgence but sovereignty, not selfishness but the recognition that without wealth, no dream survives contact with reality. To lack money is to beg for existence, to endure dependence, to watch one's dignity erode beneath the weight of obligations. To have it is to choose, to command, to endure beyond the whims of others. He who grasps this truth seizes destiny. He who rejects it surrenders to chains he cannot even see. In this understanding lies the foundation of power, and only the wise are ruthless enough to embrace it without apology. And if one studies carefully the behavior of men, it becomes evident that wealth is the single factor that alters how truth itself is received. A poor man may speak wisdom, but it will be doubted, dismissed, or ignored until another with resources repeats it, at which point it is celebrated as revelation. This injustice is not an error of society, but its very design. Men do not bow to truth, they bow to the vessel that carries it, and that vessel is gilded in gold. Wealth consecrates words, magnifies gestures, and sanctifies authority. To possess money, therefore, is not simply to survive. It is to determine what will be heard, what will be remembered, and what will be enforced. Those without it may be correct, but correctness without influence is a silent victory that feeds no one. Consider also the subtle tyranny poverty imposes. It forces a man into dependence on employers who drain his time for wages that barely sustain him. It ties him to creditors who grow fat on his desperation. It subjects him to rulers he cannot resist, because resistance requires resources he does not have. This is the invisible yoke. A man may walk the streets freely, yet every choice is shackled by what he can afford. He marries not for love, but for necessity. He works not from passion, but from survival. He speaks not from conviction, but from fear of losing what little sustains him. Such is the quiet humiliation of those who lack wealth. Their entire existence is dictated not by what they desire, but by what they can endure. The acquisition of money at all costs is thus the reclamation of agency. It is the act of severing these invisible chains and replacing them with command. With wealth, a man may choose his companions, his labors, his risks, and his pleasures. Without it, he is chosen for, labored upon, risked against, and denied pleasures altogether. To pretend otherwise is to deceive oneself into passivity. Only the wealthy man speaks with certainty, for certainty comes not from ideals, but from the ability to enforce them. And enforcement again demands resources. Words without money are pleas, words with money are commands. History is merciless in this lesson. Nations that bankrupt themselves, however noble their causes, collapse into obscurity. Generals who march without funds find their soldiers deserting before the battle begins. Philosophers who write without patrons fade into dust, their manuscripts unread, their insights lost. Even prophets whose visions shook the heavens required treasuries, donations, or the wealth of followers to carry their message across borders. Strip away the glamour of ideals, and one finds the same engine humming beneath every triumph: money. It is not glorious, but it is undeniable, and he who denies it condemns himself to irrelevance. But wealth, once acquired, demands vigilance. To possess it is not to rest, but to prepare. Envy grows in the shadows around the successful, and every man who lacks will seek to extract from those who have. A wealthy man must learn to defend as well as to spend, to conceal as well as to display, to invest as well as to hoard. Money is not static, it flows like water, and if it is not directed, it will erode the foundations of its owner. Discipline is the companion of fortune, for without discipline, fortune flees. The fool who acquires riches without strategy becomes the slave of his appetites, but the wise man who acquires riches with discipline becomes master of both himself and others. Therefore, to say at all costs is to speak of endurance as much as ambition. It is to accept hardship now, to avoid humiliation later. It is to carry scars in pursuit of treasure, knowing that those scars will heal into armor, while poverty leaves only open wounds. Wealth is not gained by accident, nor preserved by chance. It is seized by those who dare to prioritize it above comfort, who are willing to pay today's price for tomorrow's dominion. At all costs means precisely this, that the price of wealth, however steep, is always less than the cost of dependence, and in this recognition lies the seed of sovereignty. Money also possesses the peculiar power to rewrite perception itself, turning flaws into virtues and obscuring sins beneath a veneer of authority. A man without wealth who acts boldly is called reckless, while a man with wealth who commits the same act is praised for his courage. The poor man's silence is mistaken for ignorance, while the wealthy man's silence is interpreted as wisdom. This distortion is not accidental. It is the instinct of society to sanctify those who possess resources, for men are drawn to strength and security, and nothing signals both more clearly than wealth. Thus, the possession of money reshapes not only external circumstances, but the very narrative of who one is. To acquire it at all costs is to seize not only power, but the privilege of being judged by different laws than other men. Observe how easily this principle manifests in the smallest details of daily life. A man of means may walk into any room and set the tone without uttering a word. His attire, his posture, his reputation, amplified by his wealth, speak before he does. The same posture in a beggar would be mocked as arrogance, but in the rich man, it is admired as confidence. Wealth converts the ordinary into the extraordinary, the mundane into the enviable. It amplifies reputation beyond merit, and men, ever guided by appearances, mistake the glow of gold for the glow of greatness. Those who possess money at all costs thus not only command obedience but mold perception itself, becoming architects of the illusions others choose to believe. It is also true that wealth alters the terms of risk. The poor man wagers with his life, for one mistake may ruin him entirely. The wealthy man wagers with his reserves, and even failure leaves him standing, ready to play again. This asymmetry explains why the ambitious cannot afford to remain poor. Poverty makes every risk fatal, and fear of ruin cripples boldness. Wealth, by contrast, insulates, emboldens, and multiplies opportunity. Where the poor man sees a wall, the wealthy man sees a door he can afford to force open. Where the poor man hesitates, the wealthy man strikes, for he knows defeat is survivable. In this way, wealth is not only protection but acceleration, turning hesitation into momentum and momentum into conquest. Consider too how money commands loyalty in ways nothing else can. Men may pledge friendship, but hunger will make them betray it. They may swear oaths, but desperation will force them to break them. Only wealth anchors loyalty, because it satisfies both need and ambition. Soldiers march farther for pay than for patriotism, servants obey longer for wages than for devotion, and allies remain faithful when profit is shared. A man without wealth may inspire for a season, but eventually his followers drift to richer masters. A man with wealth secures loyalty that endures, not because men are noble, but because they are pragmatic. To acquire money at all costs is to secure permanence in a world of shifting allegiances. Yet wealth must be wielded as artfully as a sword. It is not enough to possess, one must know when to reveal and when to conceal. Too much display invites envy and attack. Too much secrecy invites suspicion and fear. The wise man balances between the two, showing enough to command respect while hiding enough to maintain security. Wealth is both shield and bait, both fortress and snare. The man who fails to master this duality becomes a target, while the man who understands it becomes untouchable. To acquire money at all costs, then, is not to flaunt it recklessly, but to turn it into a silent dominion, a force felt more than seen, respected more than spoken of. In the end, every man must decide whether to accept the humiliations of poverty or to endure the struggles required for wealth. Both demand sacrifice, but only one leads to sovereignty. Poverty asks for your dignity, your freedom, and your choices, and it takes them slowly until nothing remains. Wealth asks for your labor, your focus, and your discipline, but it returns them tenfold as command, respect, and independence. To choose poverty is to choose chains. To choose wealth is to choose dominion. This is why wealth must be acquired at all costs, for the price of not paying is far greater than any burden endured along the way. The pursuit of money also reshapes how time itself is experienced. For the poor man, every hour is a chain, every day a repetition of labor exchanged for survival, with no margin for reflection or creation. His time is sold cheaply, parceled into tasks that enrich others while draining his own vitality. For the wealthy man, time expands because it is no longer consumed by necessity but directed by choice. He may invest hours in strategy, in learning, in pleasures that sharpen his will rather than blunt it. Wealth converts time from a tyrant into a servant, and this transformation is the greatest of luxuries. To acquire money at all costs is therefore to purchase not only freedom of action, but mastery over the rhythm of life itself. This mastery of time grants the wealthy man an advantage in foresight. He is not forced to dwell only on today's hunger or tomorrow's rent, but can cast his vision years ahead, shaping outcomes while others scramble to endure the present. He may prepare for famine before the harvest fails, for war before the first blade is drawn, for opportunity before others even recognize it. Poverty blinds by forcing attention upon the immediate. Wealth illuminates the horizon by granting distance from desperation. Those who lack money believe fortune is sudden, arbitrary, bestowed like lightning from the sky. But those who possess it understand fortune is cultivated like a field, requiring patience, resources, and a span of vision only wealth can secure. See also how wealth magnifies reputation beyond measure. A man who fails in poverty is branded a fool. A man who fails in wealth is excused as daring. A poor man's caution is seen as cowardice. A rich man's caution is seen as prudence. Success with money multiplies itself, for men are eager to believe in the authority of prosperity. Merchants grant credit to the rich with no hesitation, but scrutinize every coin from the poor. Opportunities are offered to the wealthy before the poor even hear of them. Wealth is the proof men crave before entrusting loyalty or chance. To acquire it at all costs is to ensure that one's reputation is not left to accident, but fortified by the universal presumption that abundance implies competence. It must also be said that wealth alters the nature of conflict. A poor man is forced to fight directly, exposed and vulnerable, while a wealthy man wages battle through proxies, contracts and influence, often without lifting a hand. Money buys distance from danger, interposing others between the owner and the hazard. Lawsuits are won not by justice alone, but by the ability to sustain counsel. Political struggles are decided not only by votes, but by who has the means to fund persuasion. Even personal feuds can be redirected when money commands allies willing to absorb the blow. In this way, wealth transforms struggle itself, turning brute survival into a calculated game where the odds are tilted before the contest begins. Yet one must recognize that wealth does not erase envy, it multiplies it. To possess what others crave is to summon their resentment, their plots, their hopes of stripping you of advantage. This is why those who acquire money at all costs must also cultivate vigilance. A fortune without defenses is an invitation to predators, and envy is more dangerous than hunger, for it grows not only among the poor, but among peers who covet one's place. To hold wealth is to hold a throne that must constantly be guarded. Discipline in secrecy, wisdom in alliances, and ruthlessness in response to betrayal are the price of keeping what has been gained. To ignore this truth is to invite downfall, and many who rose quickly through fortune fell just as quickly through negligence. Still, the risks of wealth are preferable to the humiliations of poverty. For while envy threatens the rich, contempt consumes the poor. The world listens to the wealthy even as it plots against them, but it silences the poor even as it pities them. Better to be envied than forgotten. Better to guard treasure than to beg for crumbs. In this, the mandate remains unchanged. Wealth must be acquired at all costs, for its burdens are lighter than the weight of helplessness, and its dangers are nobler than the degradations of need. The rich man may fight to defend his crown, but the poor man never receives one to defend. Wealth also reshapes the very texture of relationships, bending affection, loyalty, and even respect toward those who possess it. A poor man may love sincerely, but his love is often strained beneath the weight of unmet needs, arguments over scarcity, and the humiliation of dependence. A wealthy man, by contrast, enters love from a position of abundance, able to provide security that deepens affection rather than erodes it. Friendship, too, is transformed. for companions rally more eagerly to one who can offer opportunities rather than burdens. Respect follows the same current. The poor man must fight for it with every gesture, while the wealthy man receives it instinctively, often without asking. In this way, wealth is not only a matter of independence but of magnetism. It attracts, binds, and sustains in ways poverty never can. Observe how wealth determines the tone of generosity. When the poor man gives, it is seen as impractical, even foolish, for he sacrifices what little he has. When the wealthy man gives, it is seen as noble, magnanimous, even saintly, because he gives from surplus. Thus money transforms the same act into two entirely different reputations, one mocked, the other praised. Charity itself requires wealth to endure, for a poor man's charity can feed one mouth for a day, while a rich man's charity can sustain generations. This is why even the moralists who curse riches depend on them for their causes. They denounce the rich publicly, while courting their favor privately, for they know the truth they cannot escape. Without wealth, even virtue dies in obscurity. Wealth also determines the kind of freedom one commands in speech. A poor man must weigh every word, for offense may cost him a wage, a favor, or a fragile connection. His tongue is chained by necessity, his opinions stifled by fear of losing the little he possesses. A wealthy man, however, speaks boldly, because no one can easily strip him of his position. He may criticize, command, or provoke, and his wealth shields him from the immediate consequences that silence others. Thus, wealth is not only freedom of body, but freedom of tongue, and he who acquires it at all costs acquires the right to speak without trembling. Consider, too, the difference in legacy. A poor man may labor all his life with dignity, but his death often erases his efforts within a single generation. His children inherit struggle, his name fades quickly, his works are forgotten. A wealthy man, however, extends his reach beyond his grave. His heirs inherit not only his gold but his position, his influence, his unfinished projects. His name is carved in stone, his memory preserved in institutions he built or funded. Wealth alone secures remembrance, for history records not the hungry man's suffering, but the powerful man's mark upon the world. To acquire money at all costs, therefore, is also to wage war against oblivion. Yet one must not mistake wealth for permanence. It is a fire that must be tended, not a monument that stands untouched. Fortunes squandered by foolish heirs vanish as though they never existed, and dynasties collapse when discipline dies with the patriarch. Thus, to acquire money at all costs is only the first victory. The greater challenge is to preserve it across generations. This requires foresight, education, and the ruthless removal of weaknesses among those entrusted with inheritance. Wealth unguarded becomes sand slipping through fingers, but wealth guarded with wisdom becomes an empire that endures. Ultimately, money at all costs is not only about survival, freedom, or comfort. It is about command. To live without it is to be commanded. To live with it is to command. There is no neutrality in this law, for the world recognizes only masters and servants, leaders and followers, creditors and debtors. Every man must choose his place, and wealth is the deciding factor. The poor man may dream of equality, but the wealthy man writes the terms of it. The poor man may dream of justice, but the wealthy man enforces it. To acquire money at all costs, then, is to choose mastery over submission, authorship over anonymity, destiny over despair. Wealth also has the singular effect of shielding a man from the trivial humiliations that plague those without it. The poor man must endure insults silently, because to protest risks the little security he clings to. He must wait in lines, beg for opportunities, tolerate indignities from those above him, all because his lack of resources renders him powerless to resist. The wealthy man, however, lives in a different rhythm. He need not wait where others wait, nor beg where others beg, nor endure insults he does not wish to hear. Money constructs invisible walls around him, filtering out inconveniences and reducing the friction of life. To acquire wealth at all costs, then, is to rise above the petty degradations that grind down dignity day after day. See how wealth also alters the quality of ambition. For the poor, ambition is often confined to survival, to eat, to pay, to avoid ruin. Their dreams shrink to the size of their resources, and hope itself becomes rationed. The wealthy, however, are permitted to dream without restraint, for their foundation is secure. Their ambitions extend beyond survival, into conquest, innovation, and legacy. Wealth broadens the horizon, multiplying possibilities in every direction. This is why those who acquire money at all costs are often accused of being ruthless, because their vision extends where others dare not look, and their resources allow them to act while others merely fantasize. One must also recognize that wealth creates silence around authority. A poor man must shout to be heard, and even then his words travel little farther than his own breath. A wealthy man need only whisper, and his voice is carried by messengers, servants, allies eager to align themselves with his power. His influence multiplies without his effort, because money lends volume to his command. Authority without wealth is fragile, depending on goodwill. Authority with wealth is enduring, because it is reinforced by necessity. Men listen not only because they respect, but because they must. Thus, money at all costs is not only the acquisition of resources, but the multiplication of one's voice until it echoes where presence alone could never reach. Notice also the way money bends justice. Courts claim impartiality, but judgments are swayed by the strength of counsel, the length of proceedings, the patience of appeals, all of which require money to sustain. The poor man may be innocent yet ruined by the cost of proving it, while the wealthy man may be guilty yet preserved by his ability to delay, obscure, or negotiate his way to freedom. Justice, like loyalty, bends toward those who can afford to purchase time and representation. It is not a matter of fairness but of reality. Money writes the terms under which law itself is applied. To ignore this is to live in naivete. To embrace it is to arm oneself properly in a world governed by appearances of fairness but sustained by wealth. Even in the realm of ideas, money is decisive. A poor thinker may conceive brilliance, but without resources to print, promote, or protect his ideas, they die unheard. A wealthy thinker, or one supported by wealth, can spread even mediocrity across nations. Thus, wealth is not only the sustenance of bodies, but the engine of influence itself, dictating which ideas survive and which vanish. Truth does not prevail merely because it is true. It prevails when it is amplified, and amplification demands coin. To acquire money at all costs, then, is to acquire the means by which one's thoughts endure beyond one's life. Without it, even genius evaporates into silence. So the law is unyielding. To possess wealth is to dictate the terms of existence. To lack it is to suffer them. Every man is faced with this choice, though most deceive themselves into neutrality. They claim they do not seek wealth, but in truth, they lack the discipline to endure its pursuit. They convince themselves virtue alone is enough, but in reality, virtue without money becomes invisible. They declare they are content with little, but in truth, they are bound by necessity, mistaking resignation for peace. Better to admit the hunger, better to embrace the pursuit openly, better to acquire money at all costs, than to cloak impotence in the language of false virtue. For the world belongs not to those who wish, but to those who pay. Wealth further dictates the rhythm of influence across generations, for it is not only a force in the life of the possessor, but in the lives of his heirs. A poor man may teach his children discipline, morality, and resilience, yet these virtues are often squandered when they collide with the harsh necessities of survival. His children must fight again the same battles he fought, repeating the cycle of scarcity as though bound by fate. A wealthy man, however, equips his heirs with not only lessons but foundations. He hands them the means to pursue greater ambitions without being strangled by hunger or debt. His wealth becomes the soil from which dynasties grow, giving his lineage continuity where the poor leave only broken beginnings. Thus, to acquire money at all costs is to wage war not only for oneself but for bloodline and legacy, ensuring that one's name does not vanish into the anonymity of poverty. This legacy is why rulers, conquerors, and merchants alike sought treasuries beyond measure. They knew that battles may be won by strength, but empires are secured by inheritance. A throne defended with valor collapses if the successor cannot finance loyalty. An army that conquers today disbands tomorrow if the coffers run dry. Even the greatest ideas, movements, or revolutions crumble without the wealth to sustain them after the first passion fades. Therefore, money is not merely the guarantee of present survival, it is the architect of permanence. To acquire it at all costs is to seize continuity in a world where time erases the unprepared. Observe also how wealth reframes the concept of justice across generations. A poor family may be righteous for centuries, yet their righteousness leaves no monuments, no schools, no foundations, no enduring testimony. Their goodness is forgotten as quickly as their graves are covered. A wealthy family, however, whether virtuous or not, imprints itself upon institutions that outlast lifetimes. Their names are carved upon buildings, their influence woven into politics, their presence etched into memory, not because they were noble, but because they were wealthy enough to preserve the illusion of nobility. History is not written by the good, nor even by the strong, but by those who possessed the means to commission its telling. It is also true that wealth distorts the perception of morality itself. The poor man who schemes for advantage is called deceitful. The wealthy man who does the same is praised as shrewd. A poor man's ambition is called desperation. A rich man's ambition is celebrated as vision. Thus, money sanctifies vice when cloaked in abundance, and damns virtue when shackled in poverty. Men judge not by actions alone, but by the results those actions produce, and wealth is the proof that silences doubt. In this way, morality itself bends beneath the weight of money, for men will accept as virtuous whatever the wealthy can afford to defend. Yet wealth's power to distort does not make it false, rather, it makes it necessary. For in a world governed by appearances, the ability to shape appearances is the highest form of truth, and appearances cannot be shaped without resources. The man who insists on living by pure virtue alone soon discovers that without wealth, his virtue dies with him, unrecognized, unpreserved, and powerless to influence the world beyond his grave. To acquire money at all costs is therefore not to betray virtue, but to preserve it, arming it with the resources it needs to survive in a hostile reality. Therefore, those who scorn the pursuit of money betray not only themselves but their descendants. They consign their children to struggle, their names to obscurity, their values to oblivion. To refuse wealth is to refuse continuity, to embrace mortality, not only of the body but of the spirit. The man who acquires wealth at all costs ensures that his will endures beyond his flesh, shaping generations who will never meet him, and in this endurance lies the truest form of power. For the poor man's memory is buried with him, but the wealthy man's shadow stretches long after death. In the final reckoning, wealth becomes the ultimate test of a man's resolve, for it demands clarity of purpose and the courage to endure costs that others flee from. Every sacrifice made in its pursuit, sleep surrendered, comforts denied, friendships strained, transforms into the bricks of independence, while every indulgence avoided spares a man from the humiliation of dependence. The poor often imagine that wealth is inherited, gifted, or stolen, but they overlook the relentless labor and ruthless focus that lie beneath its surface. Fortune is not merely granted, it is seized, disciplined, and defended. To acquire money at all costs is to embrace this truth without apology, that the price of freedom is always paid in advance. Wealth, once obtained, reveals its truest gift, not luxury, but dominion. Luxury fades, consumed by appetite, forgotten in the endless hunger for more. Dominion endures, for it is the ability to bend circumstances and command respect without raising one's voice. The wealthy man does not need to plead, nor does he need to justify. His resources stand as his argument, his proof, his shield. Where others struggle to be believed, he is believed because he can afford to act. Where others pray to be spared hardship, he is spared because he can afford defenses. In this way, money is more than possession, it is protection, reputation, and authority interwoven into one. But let no one mistake wealth for rest. The pursuit may end, but the vigilance begins. Fortune once captured must be guarded from the entropy of waste, the schemes of rivals, and the weakness of heirs. A wealthy man must train his lineage to bear the weight of possession, lest his empire dissolve in the hands of fools. To preserve wealth is a second conquest, requiring the same ruthlessness that first acquired it. Thus, money at all costs is not a single battle, but a lifelong campaign, a war waged against complacency, extravagance, and decay. Those who forget this law are devoured by the very riches they once celebrated. Still, despite its burdens, wealth remains preferable to the slow suffocation of poverty. Poverty is not merely a condition of the body, but a corruption of the spirit. It bends the proud into servitude, silences the wise into obscurity, and erases the noble into nothingness. Wealth, with all its dangers, at least permits choice. Choice of enemies, choice of allies, choice of destiny. The poor man is forced into paths carved by others. The wealthy man carves his own. To choose poverty is to surrender command. To choose wealth is to seize authorship of one's existence. And authorship is the very essence of power. History itself confirms the mandate. Kingdoms that fortified their treasuries endured, while those that neglected them collapsed despite courage and faith. Leaders who secured wealth are remembered as visionaries. Those who scorned it are remembered as victims. Even prophets and sages, whose words still echo across centuries, did not endure on virtue alone. They were preserved by patrons, by institutions, by treasuries that carried their message forward. Without wealth, even divinity is muted. With it, even mortality achieves immortality. Thus, money at all costs is not only the law of survival, but the secret of remembrance. Therefore, let it be declared, wealth is not greed, but sovereignty. It is not indulgence, but insulation. It is not corruption, but continuity. He who acquires money at all costs accepts the weight of vigilance, the envy of others, the ceaseless demand for discipline. But in exchange, he receives command over time, authority over men, freedom from chains, and the chance to etch his will into eternity. The poor man dies once when his body fails. The wealthy man lives on, for his wealth preserves his shadow across generations. Choose then, not the illusion of virtue without coin, but the truth of power with it. For in the end, only wealth allows a man to rise above circumstance, to master his own fate, and to rule even from the grave. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. Poverty is not humility, it is chains. Wealth is not greed, it is freedom. Without it, you will crawl. With it, you will command. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to pay today's price to escape tomorrow's humiliation? Are you willing to suffer discipline now, so you never bow later? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I choose wealth. Let's see how many here are truly ready to embrace sovereignty at all costs. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.